Revelation chapter 16. We're just going to look at the first 7 verses. There's just a lot to get to in this. But Revelation chapter 16, verse number 1, it says, "And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go your ways, and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and the fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the water say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments." And we'll stop there tonight. And so by this point in the book of Revelation, we are desperately close to the return of Christ. Now, obviously, it's impossible for us to say, to pinpoint this and to say exactly when this is taking place. But given the nature of some of these judgments, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, you can see that this really must only be a few days away from the actual return of Christ. And so when I say we're there at the end, I mean, in my opinion, I think we're probably just 2 or 3 days out from the actual return of Christ. Now, we understand that Revelation generally, the book generally, is chronological. But obviously there are portions here and there that kind of go back and take a look at other portions. And so we're going to get into that in chapter 17 and 18. Chapter 17 and 18 are going to take us back and look at some other things. But when we get to the end of chapter 16, we're really at the end, which is where chapter 19 will pick up with the return of Christ. And so I'll just kind of give you a look ahead of the chronology of this. But the purpose of these last 7 judgments here are first of all, and obviously, to continue God's judgment upon the world. That's pretty obvious. But also to prepare the earth for Christ's return. And that is also what we see in these judgments. It says it prepares the world for the return of Christ that we'll see over in chapter 19. Now, there's a lot of people who believe that these judgments, these vile judgments, are the exact same as the trumpet judgments. They think that these are just the same judgments redescribed using different terminology. And I'll say that there are a lot of similarities between the two, between the vial and the trumpet judgments, and also the plagues of Egypt. But there are very important differences that show us that these are not the same, that this is a different set of judgments altogether. And I'll give you 3 of these differences. So first, unlike the plagues in Egypt or the trumpet judgments, the vial judgments are worldwide. Now, obviously, the plagues of Egypt, they were localized to Egypt. I mean, that's obvious. The trumpet judgments, you can go through those and read those in chapters 7 and 8, I believe. And so the trumpet judgments, most of them are affecting only a third of the earth. You'll see that a third of the trees, a third of the grass, a third of the oceans, a third of the seas were affected. And so it's not a worldwide thing. It's affecting a portion of the earth. However, in these vial judgments, as we just read, you see that these are worldwide, global judgments. And so these are very important differences that don't really need to be harmonized here. Secondly, most of the trumpet judgments affect mankind indirectly. A third of the oceans are affected, and so they have to go to a different part of the ocean. A third of the fresh water is affected, so they got to get the fresh water somewhere else. A third of the grass, and so it's kind of an indirect judgment. Not all, but most of the vile judgments are direct judgments against mankind. Sores, scorching heat from the sun, and these kinds of things. So you'll see that there are direct judgments against mankind in the vile judgments. And then third, and this is really the main thing here, after the trumpet judgment, man still has ample opportunity to hear the gospel and repent. And we've talked about really all of the ways in which Revelation describes to us how that's going to happen. We know that the 2 witnesses are going to be preaching the gospel supernaturally. The 144,000 witnesses are going to be preaching the gospel. I don't think we should have any understanding that there are going to be other Christians who are going to be saved and are going to be preaching the gospel. I mean, the Revelation tells us they're going to be killed for their testimony and for their witness. They're going to be preaching the gospel. Chapter 14 talks about an angel that is flying out in the atmosphere, preaching the gospel to the world. And so after the trumpet judgments, we know that there's still opportunity. Now, how much of, by that point, probably most of the people's minds have been, decisions have been made usually, but there's still going to be some But they still have opportunity. After the final judgments, that opportunity is gone. As we talked about, chapter 16 leads us up directly to the end. Now, we'll take a little parenthetical section at 17 and 18, but then we'll pick back up in 19 with the return of Christ. And so the opportunity is gone by that point as Jesus comes back to judge the world. And so that to me is the biggest difference. And I don't see any reason why we should take these to be the same, just described in different language. I see these as a whole new set of 7 judgments. And as I've talked about in the past, to be the actual contents of the 7th trumpet. And I've talked about that in the past. I won't get into that again tonight. So now John here in verse number 1, he begins his description of these final judgments by speaking of this great voice. So verse 1, and I heard a great voice out of the temple. Now, this voice is none other than the very voice of God, and we can know that for a couple of reasons. Not only is this voice coming from the temple, which is a clue there, but we were just told in the last verse of the last chapter, chapter 15, verse 8, that the smoke from the glory of God was so great in the temple of heaven at this point. It says back in verse 8 of chapter 15, it says that no man was able to enter into the temple. And so this is a voice coming out from that very place that no man is able to enter save God. And then, of course, down in verse 17 of the chapter that we're in, it says, and the 7th angel poured out his vial, and there came the great voice, the same voice, out of the temple of heaven, and it gives us more specifics here, from the throne, saying, it is done. And so, obviously, we know that the one on the throne, back from chapters 4 and 5, this is none other than God speaking. Now, the great voice here, it sends out the 7 angels that we talked about in last week that were given these vials, the 7 angels to begin pouring out the contents of these last 7 judgments here. John Phillips describes it this way: the judgment angels, standing in solemn line with the bowls with the bowls in their hands, are now issued the word of command, and like a lightning flash, forth they go on their errands of doom. And so I talked about how these, and just by the way that the text is written here, you seem to get this insinuation. These are happening rapid fire. I believe that probably they're kind of just stacking on top of one another. I don't think it's one happens and then it ends, and then the second happens and then it ends. I believe that these are just happening right on top of one another up until the actual return of Christ. And so when he says that they're out like a lightning flash, these things are just happening quickly and, like I said, kind of in a rapid-fire succession. Now, the first angel pours out his vial, and in verse number 2, it talks about the sore. And so in verse number 2, and the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast. And so the sore is described with those 2 words, noisome and grievous. Now, the word noisome, it means troublesome, injurious, pernicious, destructive, and baneful. That is the way that John describes this particular sore. And then the word grievous means to cause pain or to cause trouble. And so whereas we don't get a thorough description of the exact medical implications of whatever this particular sore is, whatever it is, we can know that it's going to be a nasty and a painful malady. Now, the word for sore there in the Greek simply means a running sore or an ulcer. Not to get too gross here tonight, but we can understand that perhaps this is some type of boil or something. We don't know exactly what it is, but whatever it is, I can guarantee you this, it's not going to be something that's just a little bit of an inconvenience and it's just going to quickly go away. This is going to be something that is incredibly painful and in my opinion, probably debilitating. It's probably going to be so painful that you're not going to want to really do anything. And it's going to be one of these things that's just going to affect you. Now, of course, like I said, if the timeline is correct here, they probably only got a couple of days left. So God is just inflicting the world, of course, only those with the mark, but he's inflicting the world with this incredibly nasty and just painful sore, whatever it may be. Now, it does specifically say there at the end of verse 2 that Christians will not get this. This is only for those who have taken the mark, only for those who have worshiped the image. And as we've talked about, those 2 things go hand in hand. You don't take the mark without worshiping the image. Those 2 things go hand in hand. And so, now there's no way for us to know how many Christians are going to live through the tribulation. We know it will happen because they will inhabit the millennium. But we don't know how many. But we know chapter 12, back in chapter 12, it mentions that there's going to be a group who are led out to a place out in the wilderness. It doesn't tell us exactly where. A lot of people surmise it might be Petra. We talked about that when we went over in chapter 12. But these people are going to be supernaturally protected, and it mentions that. Of course, we know that there's the 144,000 who are sealed and protected. I have no reason to believe that there will not be other Christians who just simply survive. Humans have a natural survivalist instinct. We're going to do whatever we can to make it. Again, there's no reason for me to believe that there won't be some, probably not a large group, but there will probably be some who just find a way to survive through all of the things that are going to be taking place. But it doesn't matter how many there are. The point is that however many there are, they are not affected by this. And so however many it will be, Christians will be spared this particular judgment. And here's the thing. All those who have taken the mark are going to be given, in my opinion, a small preview, a very small preview of the eternal judgment that was foretold back in chapter 14. If you just look back to chapter 14, verses 9 through 11, it says, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." And so we see that there's going to be absolute torment waiting for the people who have taken the mark, who have worshiped the beast. And I think that this sore is going to be a form of torment to them, probably not going to be able to sleep, probably not going to be able to rest. And so it's just going to be a small picture, a small preview of the absolutely terrible and eternal torment that is waiting for them at this point in just a few days. Like I said, it's a terrible thing. And this is just the first of the 7 final. And so this sore, again, we don't know exactly what it is, but it's going to be just this nasty, terrible sore that's going to inflict a lot of people in the world, and it's going to be just, in my opinion, debilitating pain that's going to last for however long they have until the return of Christ. And so we get to the second vial there in verse number 3. "And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea." And so we know that back in the trumpet judgments, I mentioned them earlier, in the second trumpet, God turned a third of the sea to blood. Now he turns the entire sea to blood. You can see that here again. This is worldwide now. "And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood." Not a third of the sea, just the sea. And so we're talking about the oceans here. Back in the trumpet judgments, a third of what was in the sea died. Now everything that's in the sea dies. And I don't think there's really any way in which we can begin to contemplate just how terrible this is going to be. I'll maybe give a little hint to that here in just a second. But the water here is described not necessarily as blood, but as the blood of a dead man. Now what that means is that it might not be actual blood. It might be, but it might not be. It just says that it is as the blood of a dead man. So now what does that mean? Maybe that just means the water is going to be red. Maybe that means that the water is going to be, and I don't know why you would, but if you've ever seen a pool of blood from somebody who has died and has been there for a while, it's not a bright red. It's a dark, thick, possibly coagulated, pool of blood, and perhaps that's what it's talking about. Maybe that is what the water is going to look like. We don't know, but it just says that it's going to be as the blood of a dead man. And so not necessarily blood, but perhaps blood. There is a phenomenon that's not entirely uncommon. It happens from time to time. And I'm not saying that this is what it's going to be, but it is interesting nonetheless, where algae will begin to grow uncontrollably. And when it does this, it actually turns the water a red color. It's referred to as a red tide. It turns the water a red color, and basically any animals that are in that area where the algae is growing, they're going to die. It is incredibly toxic to animals that are living. In fact, there was one in Florida just 2 years ago, back in 2018, and you can see there a fairly good portion of this particular coastline is red. That's not blood, that's algae. Now, it's referred to as a red tide, and in this particular red tide in Florida, reports say that there were at least 100 manatees, a dozen dolphins, thousands of fish, 300 sea turtles, amongst other animals that washed up onto the shore as a result of dying because of this red tide. Now, that's just an insignificant portion of just the coastline of Florida. Ramp that up worldwide across the entire ocean. And we can't even begin to imagine what we're dealing with. As animals all over the world are being washed up onto the shore, you can imagine, it says that everything in the oceans are going to die. You can imagine anybody who happened to have been out on the oceans at this time, they're stuck. There's no way you're getting back with the amount of animals that are going to be floating up to the top of the water. You're not going to be able to get back. And then add on top of that all of the carrion birds who are going to be coming down and feasting on this, all the insects that are going to come out. Add on top of that the stench that's going to result as these fish coming out and putrefying and all the things that happen when they wash up on shore. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be a red tide. I am not of the opinion that God needs natural means to make something like this happen. I'm just saying that this is something that it could be, and if it's not, it gives us a small preview of what it would be like. Because it says that all of the seas are going to be red, they're going to be as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. This is going to be a massive blow to what is an industry that has already taken a massive blow because a third of the sea was taken out in the trumpet judgments. And so we can only imagine all the implications that result from this. But this is far better than the next thing that happens. You would much rather this than what happens next. And so in the third vial, there in verse number verse number 4, it says, "And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters." And here there's no as the blood, it's just they became blood. And so there's a difference here. And so the third vial then turns all the freshwater sources into blood. Again, there's no as the blood, it's just they became blood. Now again, in the third trumpet, a third of the fresh water was contaminated, but now it's all of it. All of the fresh water has now become blood. Now we understand when you look at the plagues of Egypt that God did this. He turned the rivers of Egypt to blood, but now he does this on a global scale. Again, you can't even begin to imagine all the implications from something like this. But as I begin to think about this, I was just take it back to the first vial. Most of the population of the world right now is walking around with what the Greek describes as a running sore. And now they have no water to wash with. Now they have nothing to sterilize with. Now they don't. That's all been taken away from them. There's no showers. There's no fresh water to drink. None of this is happening anymore. And so, and I looked this up. Red tides don't happen in fresh water. So whatever this is, it's not a red tide. They don't happen in freshwater sources. And so this is God supernaturally turning the water into blood. You can imagine all the fish and everything that's in those waters are now dead. But this takes away the fresh water, drinkable, potable, all this. It's gone. Nothing to clean with. Nothing. It's all gone in an instant. And so from this particular judgment alone, if you took away all the others and just looked at this one alone tells us that we're not dealing with weeks. We're not dealing with months. We can't be. We must only be dealing with hours, days at most. Because there's no indication given here that once this happens, that it just happens for a while and then God puts it back and now there's fresh water again. We don't get any of that indication. Now, I know that humans only last 3 to 4 days with no water, so at the most we're talking 3 to 4 days. But adding on top of that, the sores and the sickness that is going on with all the people around, and we can understand that we're not talking about a long period of time. Again, we're talking about days at most, hours at best, before God is returning, or before Jesus is returning here. And so that's why I say these must be stacking on top of one another. And so there's these sores that are inflicted upon the people, and then the oceans turning to something like the blood of a dead man, and then the freshwater sources turning into blood. And so all the water sources are now gone, and they have nothing to turn to. And so at this particular point, especially if you're someone who's living at this time, but even now today, looking through this as something that's going to happen in the future, reading through this, lest anyone go through this and think that God is unfair or at worst unjust, he now has an angel interject here in verse number 5. And so John says, "And I heard the angel of the waters say," and so this is the angel who just poured out this vial upon the water. The angel of the waters says this, "Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shall be, because thou hast judged thus." You're not unrighteous for doing this. In fact, you're righteous for judging in such a manner. And so this angel interjects with the message of the righteousness of God. Now God is righteously judging a people who, as it says in verse number 6, who have shed the bloods of saints and prophets. And so he's righteously judging a people who have lived unrighteously, who have lived ungodly, who have chosen to take in the mark, who have chosen to worship the beast, who have chosen to become a part of this system, this world system that is anything but godly. And so God is righteously stepping in and judging a people who have outright rejected him. And so they have become, and this is such a sad phrase there at the end of verse number 6, they are worthy. He's not coming in and doing this to innocent people. Of course, we understand there's not any such thing as an innocent person. But God is coming in and stepping in into an unrighteous world, and in his righteousness is judging them and is just in doing so. And so they have become bloodthirsty with the lives of God's children, and so he gives them blood to drink. They have refused the living water, and so he gives them no water. And so, interestingly enough, it would seem that at this time that when God is pouring out the vengeance that has been promised to come, it seems that he is doing what the world asks for and has turned to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth sort of system. And so again, they've become bloodthirsty, and so he says, all right, you want blood to drink? Here it is. You refuse the living water of Christ, I'm taking away all the water. And so again, it's the judgment and it's righteous of God. Now, you don't have to turn there if you don't want to, but it's I think epitomizes for us Hebrews chapter 10. And so in Hebrews chapter 10, starting at verse number 26, here's what we read. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sore punishment, suppose he, shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant, wherewith he was sanctified, an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. It says, for we know him that hath said, vengeance belongeth unto me. I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. And then we know, verse 31, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. And that is exactly what is happening here. I mentioned earlier all the ways in which the gospel is going to be propagated. Listen, during the tribulation, interestingly enough, the gospel is going to be propagated in ways in which we can only dream right now. The gospel is going to be worldwide. It is going to go everywhere. People are going to have heard it. Again, as I said, there's going to be an angel in the atmosphere preaching the gospel to the world. They're going to have heard it. They're going to know. They're going to have heard of the death and the burial and the resurrection of Christ. They're going to have heard that Jesus shed his blood for them. And what are they going to do? They're going to turn around and take the mark, and they're going to worship the image, and they're going to follow in the ungodly ways of the Antichrist. And so we read all this and we think, is God harsh? No, he's not harsh. He's righteously stepping into a world that is bold-faced, said, we don't want you. We want the so-called prosperity that this guy has promised us, and we're willing to turn our back on you and do everything that he's asked us to do. And so no, he's not unrighteous. He's stepping in complete holiness and his justness, and he's coming in and he's judging this world, and he's doing it in the right way. And then in verse number 7, and I really like that, well, it doesn't end here. We're ending here tonight. But I really like the way verse 7 says this. He said, and I heard another out of the altar say. And so this is an interesting thing. Who is this? I heard another out of the altar say, even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. And so God's righteousness then is reaffirmed by another voice that is described as out of the altar. Now here's why I think this is. Because it doesn't tell us who it is, but here's why I think this is. I think this is likely a reference to those who were martyred and those who have prayed for the vengeance of God, a group who we have already seen a couple of times in the book of Revelation, but probably most notably, if you want to turn there back to chapter number 6, as we read, let me get over there, but chapter number 6, starting in verse number, let me see here, verse number 9, and when he had opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar, and so there's our key there, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. Look at verse 10. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And so we've seen them calling out for vengeance. God, what they have done is not right. When is their judgment going to come? Well, it has come. It is here. It is now. It is happening. And we see here in verse 7, another voice from the altar saying, this is right. Like, look at the right. It says that at the end of verse 7. Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. It has finally come. Our answers, our prayers are being answered. And so God's judgment has now come, and they can see and realize that it is good and it is right. Now, this is only the first 3 of the final 7 judgments. And as bad as it is, things are going to get significantly worse over the next several hours, possibly over the next couple of days, which will finally culminate in the glorious return of Christ. Now, as I said, that doesn't take place until chapter 19. And so chapter 16 deals with the rest of the vial judgments. Chapter 17 and 18 kind of jump back into the Babylon system. And so we'll be talking about that and its judgment and how that takes place. And then we get into chapter 19 and actually see the return of Christ and what a just amazing and glorious chapter 19 is. So that is where we stand with these judgments, and you can see just how dangerous, how terrifying, how frightening of a time it's going to be, and it's just going to get worse from this point out. So that's where we stand in chapter 16.